His campaign is not denying he had a heart attack, so I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to argue with people who want to, bury their head in the sand. Oh, myocardial infarction. If you look that up, that's what a heart attack is. So let's not argue whether he did have a heart attack. You got to take your Bernie goggles off. So, however, even though he had a mild heart attack, I think that the media is trying to exploit that. The bottom line is this. Bernie Sanders might be 78, but Bernie Sanders was literally campaigning for 4 years, nonstop. It's not like he stopped campaigning after the 2016 campaign. He was campaigning on the road to stop the repeal of Obamacare. I covered it. He was out with Nissan workers striking. He was out all over the country. 2017, 2018, before he even started launched his campaign. So this is somebody with a hell of a lot of miles on those tires. He traveled, frankly, in some periods more than President Trump did. So it makes sense that if he was going to have a health-related illness, yeah, it makes sense. It's not necessarily the fact that he's 78. It's the fact that he, frankly, was probably pushing himself to the point of exhaustion. You see reporters, including me, that are acknowledge we're exhausted trying to keep up with him, and we're like 50 years younger than him. So I think that the media, it is fair as the media to say, listen, it's got to be monitored. He's 78. He just had a mild heart attack. We're not saying he needs to drop out, but it remains to be seen. We'll have to see how quickly he returns, how busy his event schedule is, if it seems like he's scaling back significantly, if he seems like he's having any physical signs of distress. I think these would be fair things. To say. But, of course, the Washington Post is not a fair outlet. The Washington Post is a propaganda mill. And the Washington Post, essentially, because its whole thing in life is to essentially get Bernie Sanders out of the race, prop up Joe Biden, prop up Elizabeth Warren, who they recently did a piece comparing Elizabeth Warren and her selfies to abolitionist hero Frederick Douglass. So they'll do anything. They'll go as low as possible. They'll go underground if necessary to smear, exploit Bernie Sanders. Let's take a look at the Washington Post's buffoonery. And that's all we could call it, absolute buffoonery. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but let's take a look at how the Washington Post used Bernie Sanders' health scare to basically push their crusade to get him to drop out. Senator Bernie Sanders' admission late Friday that he had suffered a heart attack 3 days earlier invited new scrutiny of the presidential candidate's age, health, and ability to keep up with the rigors of a national campaign. Very interesting that they've never written an article about how Joe Biden can't string together 3 words without stumbling, how Joe Biden is literally forgetting what cities he's in, how Joe Biden literally forgot President Obama's name in his speech, how Joe Biden literally couldn't remember the 2 cities that had back-to-back mass shootings within 24 hours. I don't really see many articles about that from the Washington Post. I digress. Sanders released the video hours after he was discharged from a Las Vegas hospital, thanking well-wishers for their support and promising to return soon to the campaign trail. Quote, "I'm feeling much better," Sanders said, arm draped around wife Jane. But neither Sanders nor his campaign offered details about how serious his condition was, leaving open the question of how soon we would reemerge and whether voters would lose confidence in his ability to serve as president. The episode also brought new attention to a Democratic field that is dominated by 3 septuagenarians: Sanders 78, former Vice President Biden 76, and Warren 70, each of whom would be the oldest president ever to take office. So what's interesting about this? But neither Sanders nor his campaign offered details about how serious his condition was, leaving open the question of how soon he would reemerge and whether voters would lose confidence. Well, what would you like them to say? They've told you he had a heart attack. They told you he's going to be off the campaign trail for a week or so. Do you want the campaign to tell you Bernie's up all night? He's got heart palpitations after the fact. He doesn't know if he's going to be able to, keep up his schedule. You You want him to tell you if it was a mild heart attack or a mild to moderate heart attack or a severe heart attack? Use your eyes. The man was out of the hospital in 2.5 days. So I don't know what more. Yes, I think when you're running for president, okay, let me put it this way. In your personal life, if you're not a public figure, your health is your private information. You know, if it was a severe heart attack, I'm pretty sure he wouldn't be out of the hospital in 2.5 days. If it was a severe heart attack, I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I'm pretty sure he'd drop out, right? I mean, you got to put your health first. Somebody who has a mild heart attack and then have stents in, generally could leave the hospital in 2.5 days. Also, you know, the media was, basically schwitzing, as I say, that they didn't know immediately that it was a heart attack. Well, maybe the campaign, but more importantly, Bernie Sanders' family is discussing his options. Maybe we weren't in the hospital with him. Maybe they were discussing options before they wanted to relay to the media. It's not like you don't know what was going on for weeks on end. It took 3 days. Do you think if Joe Biden was hospitalized with a heart attack, he would tell anyone even in 3 days? Do you think Donald Trump, if he was hospitalized with a heart attack, would tell anyone, period? I mean, it's buffoonery that they are dwelling on the fact that the campaign was hiding for days, 2.5 days, that he had a mild heart attack. And I'm not a doctor, but also, it could have been that initially it was not known that it was a heart attack, and other tests showed it was a heart attack. We don't know. So the Washington Post is basically saying, you know, his campaign is not telling anybody how serious it is. I just don't know what that means. It's a heart attack. He's 78. He's saying he's taking some time off before he returns to the campaign trail. Obviously, his family don't think it's serious enough for him to drop out. So what do you want them to tell you? Then it gets better, though. I think anybody's health is of concern when it comes to the high office, said Jeremy Dumkrieger, chairman of the Woodbury County, Iowa Democratic Party, who supported Sanders in 2016 but is neutral so far this year. Quote, you know, if the person was 40 and was having some issues, I've had concerns about it too. Sanders, but let's move on. Here we go. The campaign's decision to wait 3 days to reveal that Sanders has suffered a heart attack conjured images of Hillary Clinton's collapse in 2016 at a memorial service for the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. Clinton, at the time, the Democratic presidential nominee, had been diagnosed with a pneumonia 2 days early, but her campaign did not reveal that fact until many hours after she had fainted. I don't know why it conjures that up for you, because it's entirely different. Hillary Clinton passed out on camera, right? It's a little different than Bernie Sanders asking for a chair to give a speech and then going to the hospital. So yeah, if the front runner of the 2016 race passes out, yeah, I think her campaign should explain that she has pneumonia relatively quickly. If Bernie Sanders just quietly goes to the hospital, and who knows when it was known that he had a heart attack. I mean, I spoke with my dad's friend the other day who had a heart attack. They didn't even know it was a heart attack for days. So this is not, we don't know exactly the minute he knew it was a heart attack. So, and not all heart attacks are created equally. So I'm trying to be fair where I say, okay, a 78-year-old man having any type of heart attack, mild or not, is significant. I'm not going to sugarcoat it that it's not. I can't be a Bernie fanboy. I mean, I would say this about any 78-year-old. But a mild heart attack is different than a major heart attack. But the part about the Washington Post propaganda that really, really gets to me, and it shouldn't because I'm not shocked or anything, is then they put in the propaganda. Then they dropped in the propaganda. Sanders hasn't faced the same scrutiny, in part because he's struggling to gain momentum in the Democratic primary contest. Sanders doesn't have a, quote, strong path to the nomination, said Chris Wilson, a Republican pollster. So it's less of a story all around. It's less of a story. His heart attack is less of a story all around. First of all, I don't know which part of that statement is more absurd and propagandish. That he's struggling to gain momentum Bernie Sanders just raised more money for more donors, individual donations, than any presidential candidate in history. Let that sink in. Bernard Sanders, $18 average donation, just raised more money than any other politician in history in a 3-month period. $25.3 million from 1.4 million donations. Yeah, struggling to gain momentum in the Democratic primary contest. The polls are what the polls are. But also, as I've talked about, you got to look at each poll with a little degree of scrutiny because they're undersampling young people in a lot of these polls. The overall sample size is very low. And in a lot of these polls, they are only polling, kind of traditional, like very liberal Democrats rather than actually younger progressives. But this is never brought up, and Gallup had a great piece about this. Which Democratic presidential nominee led throughout the primary campaign? Barack Obama didn't lead until May of 2008. John Kerry did not lead until February of 2008. In the polls, of 2004, John Kerry took the lead. Bill Clinton, Bubba, didn't lead until January 1992. Dukakis, middle of February 1988. Carter, middle of April 1976. McGovern, don't know, but very late into that election year. I cut off the top by accident. Humphrey, don't know the month, late into 1968. Kennedy, that looks like middle of January 1960. The point is, most of the people that eventually won the nomination didn't lead until early into the election year. So Bernie Sanders, the Washington Post, let's find a Republican. Let's find some Republican hack pundit to say, Bernie Sanders, he's struggling to gain momentum. Don't worry about the $25.3 million he just earned. Over $10 million more than Joe Biden, more than Elizabeth Warren. Don't worry about he has more volunteers than anyone in this campaign. Don't worry about the fact that he's beating Donald Trump head to head in every state so far, other than like red states like Texas and so on. He's beating Donald Trump in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, I believe, as well as Pennsylvania. Kind of important states. No momentum, no path to the nomination. No path to the nomination. Honestly, I got to be honest with you. I believe, I don't know if Bernie Sanders would ever openly talk about it, because if you think they are crucifying him now, just wait if he said stuff like this. I think places like the Washington Post need to be regulated. I think private corporate media needs to be regulated. I'm not talking about like what Trump is talking about. Basically changing libel laws and all these things to basically put a gag order on real journalism. But frankly, the amount of propaganda that comes out from these outlets, usually aimed at one individual, it just so happens one individual, this is propaganda. This is almost like corporate, they talk about state-run TV, like they call RT state TV or Fox News state TV. What about corporate state TV? Because that's what this is. You know what? Bernie Sanders had a heart attack. It would be fair for the Washington Post to say, it needs to be monitored, yada, yada, yada. But then you're then slipping in that he has no path to the nomination, that he's struggling to gain momentum. In what metric is he struggling to gain momentum? Recent poll in Nevada, he was tied for the lead with Joe Biden. Recent polls in New Hampshire, he was competitive. Recent poll in California, he was tied for first, I believe. Recent polls in New Hampshire, he was competitive. Iowa, different polls have said different things, but he's not completely out of it. the last thing I'll say about this, it's not just the Washington Post, of course. CNN writes a ridiculous piece. How Bernie Sanders' heart attack changes the 2020 race. Oh boy, I'm not reading the whole thing. But he's the only candidate in the Democratic field, but he's not the only candidate in the Democratic field who will be affected by Sanders' heart attack. Well, Sanders at 78 is the oldest candidate in the contest. Former Vice President Joe Biden is 76 and Warren's 70. If any of them were elected president next November, they would become the oldest person ever elected to a first term as president. Given that the three frontrunners for the Democratic nod are septuagenarians, the age health question has been a low buzz in the race from the start. But with Biden, Warren, and Sanders keeping schedules that would exhaust this 43-year-old in about a day's time, there's been little to hang those worries on. Now that's changed in a fundamental way. While Sanders and his campaign and his supporters are quick to downplay how serious or not this heart attack was for the Vermont senator, it's hard to get away from the facts. Sanders, a 78-year-old man, had a heart attack that required surgery. While there are lots and lots of people who have this exact experience, most of them are not running for president. And no one disputes that being president or even for it is a hugely stressful job. What's so funny to me about this ridiculous piece? First of all, you wrote a piece saying Bernie Sanders' heart attack changes the 2020 race. According to who? That's just an opinion masquerading as fact. Bernie Sanders, for all we know, could be back on the campaign trail next week, doing 3 events a week, three events a day. But I love how they put in there, that Bernie, Warren, and Biden have been keeping crazy schedules that put this 43-year-old to shame. This is, of course, Chris Cillizza, that hack. Joe Biden is keeping a hectic schedule like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. In fairness, Warren does campaign a lot. Joe Biden goes around the country doing more fundraisers than campaign rallies. Joe Biden does maybe 1 event a day. And there's many days, because I get the emails, he's meeting with advisors. Joe Biden isn't keeping a hectic schedule. He's basically having himself a little mini fundraising vacation throughout the campaign. So if you want to look at somebody's health, why is Joe Biden barely campaigning? Why is he having more fundraisers? Well, we know why he's having more fundraisers, because he's not getting small dollar donations. That's why his anemic performance, this is his anemic performance from last quarter. Kudos to Joseph for the fantastic graphic. I mean, he's dropped 10 million. 10 million! And by the way, in that first April through June, he raised more money in less time. So he raised less money given more time. And he's doing almost like 3 or 4 big fundraisers a week. And we have a story about one of his recent fundraisers, which was just incredible to me. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.